Thank you very much. So I was hoping to open this panel discussion with the good news of having the treaty on the plastic pollution organized by the UN that was being discussed last week and over the weekend in Busan, South Korea, to have been signed by the 117 countries. Unfortunately, maybe as some of you have seen, it's been pushed back to 2025 for the reason of diverging views. The treaty was meant to address plastic pollution and particularly put a limit on its production. As we all know, plastic pollution causes threat to the environment, participating in biodiversity loss. Plastic in the soil threatens our food system and water security as well as our health. Thus, it is crucial to have in mind the 5 Rs, which are refuse, reduce, reuse, repurpose, and recycle, as focusing on reuse and recycling alone will not solve the problem, so reducing general waste production is key. Still, in our linear system, recycling and better waste management is imperative, and overall it needs to be improved worldwide. With consumerism still increasing and the middle class expanding, it is important to create recycling solutions that match different cultural contexts and that are specifically tailored to meet the needs of different communities and emerging markets. And if we want to accelerate the transition to a more circular economy, behavioral science can really be a great tool to address the gap between knowledge and action, understanding waste and recycling habits, fostering motivation, as well as promoting community awareness. This is why it is my great pleasure to introduce our 3 speakers who have all done very exciting project and research on this topic. And first off is Roos, who have a background in psychology and neuropsychology and behavioral science. She co-founded in May 2022 Nuance Behavior, a behavioral science collective that helps teams build products and services to drive real-world behavior change at scale. Roos and her team leverage behavioral science to shape product strategies and design. She's worked across several sectors, from cyber resilience and insurance to sustainability and habit formation. As a great communicator and designer, she's also been mentioned as one of the top voices to follow on LinkedIn for applying behavioral science to product design and user experience. So she will today present one of their projects done in collaboration with a US-based NGO called the Recycling Partnership. So over to you, Rose.
Thank you. I didn't expect such an elaborate introduction, but I appreciate it. Let me just quickly share my screen. Let's see. This works for everybody?
Yes. Well, thanks.
Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about a project we've been doing for the last 1.5, 2 years with the Recycling Partnership. This was specifically focused on household recycling. It also taps into like reducing consumerism a little bit, but the main focus was really on household recycling. And we were brought in to help the Recycling Partnership scale their solutions to a more digital world. They did start experimenting with some digital tools already, but our job was to really make sure and help them make their tools behaviorally informed. Before we were brought in, they did a lot of research already, and some interesting findings were that people are just really confused about information on recycling packaging. Also, they feel like they don't really get enough local information about what they can do, because in the US and also in other places in the world, but in the US, it's like in some places, in some communities, you can recycle a certain material, and in others you can't. So you really need that local information. And people felt like they were just not really informed by their communities, which is interesting because they did get these types of mailers just in their mailbox. It's a flyer with what you can and cannot recycle. But it's possible that people maybe it slipped through the system, they didn't receive it, or it just got tossed in the junk, or people just don't remember receiving this. Plus, some interesting statistics were that only 21% of recyclable material is actually captured, and 76% is lost at a household level. So that clearly indicates that at the household level, things can really improve. So what we were focusing on was, among some other questions like these two, how can we increase awareness and confidence in local recycling? Because if the information on a package is just confusing, it's quite, it's just annoying to recycle, right? It's confusing if you don't really know what to do with it. Also, it's confusing if you may hear from other people that they can recycle a certain material and you can't. So that in combination with that, some time ago there were some articles about how not everything that you put in a recycling bin actually gets recycled, and that can also really decrease your motivation. Um, so yeah, how can we increase awareness and confidence in the local recycling system? And what is the best way to reach and engage the audience, especially given that some parts of the audience live in a digital world? Recycling, like you want it, ideally you want everybody to recycle, but in behavior change projects, like you can't design a solution that caters to everybody. So you need to make segments. And how can you engage the different segments of your audience in the best way? So, oh, before you actually start working towards a solution, we ask ourselves some questions. So first of all, you start with what support is actually needed. So like what intervention is needed? How can we make recycling easy, more rewarding? The problem with recycling is that you don't really get feedback on what you're doing because you just toss it away and hope for the best. And then second, what is the best method to deliver it? So a lot of companies nowadays want to have a chatbot or an app, but I mean, if that's not really the right way to bring that intervention to people, then just don't do it. First, we decide on the intervention, then choose the form factor. And then what is the most useful moment to intervene? So if you look at the whole user journey from moment of buying something to actually disposing of it, what are the most critical points in time to intervene? When are people most receptive? When is it most relevant? And also how can you align with current habits that people already have? We looked at the existing solutions that the recycling partnership already had, and we built some new ones, and that together resulted in this ecosystem of solutions, both digital and non-digital. And also you see that like you can change the scale or like the level of implementation based on the needs of a certain community. They're all connected to a database, but they're also interconnected to improve the overall functionality of the ecosystem of tools. And the reason that we have different types of tools is that different tools cater to different needs and different types of information and support that people may need. So one example is this pie crust on the packaging. So this is at the moment of disposal. You can't just put a generic line of text with instruction on here because it depends on the location. So recycle check is a QR code that we developed. You can scan it and then you get this information about how you can recycle it. It's you fill in your zip code and then you get local information. Basically, yes or no answer, but here you see that there's some nuance to it because this item contains of multiple materials and you need to dispose of them in different ways. So you can check that. Another one is actually a chatbot. We are experimenting with a chatbot, and the reason for this is that sometimes people are curious about why you can or cannot recycle something, and we also want to encourage people to explore that a little bit more. So this is for, you can still ask yes and no questions, but you can also inquire further, ask why questions, and the chatbot is set to encourage the exploration. We're currently testing this. You can also try it out. I can send a link in the chat. You can test it out, and we're looking at like how people are interacting with this chatbot right now. Some quick takeaways. Really try to meet people where they are if you're building towards a solution. See what they're interested in using. Also try to align with existing routines and habits that they already have, because otherwise a completely new solution is just going to be too difficult for them to adopt. It's just going to be too big of a step. And really try to decide on what type of support is needed in your context before you get stuck on a form factor like a chatbot. We really try to hold off from the chatbot for a little bit before just diving into it because it's just a cool thing to build. So those are some key takeaways. I can talk about this for hours, but yeah, hope I kept it short.
Yes, great. Great intro and lovely. If indeed you could share the link to the chatbot, I'm sure many people would like to try, me, myself included. So yes, great. So then to follow, we have Rob, who is also a co-founder. Behavior Change is a not-for-profit organization founded in 2009, and Rob just mentioned that on next Monday it will be the 50th 15th anniversary, sorry, of behavior change. So in advance, happy anniversary. Then that probably also make Roos and his co-founders pioneers in creating social and environmental change grounded in behavioral science methodologies and interventions. With almost 2 decades of experience, Rob has applied behavioral insights to challenges as diverse as recycling, active traveling, healthy diets, accessibility, littering, and water efficiency. He has always been interested in translating the theory into real-world intervention, and has led to delivering impactful projects, working with partners such as Mars Riley, National Trust, British Cycling, and RAP. Rob will now present a project done in collaboration with London to increase recycling practices in purpose-built flats in London. So over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Lucy. Like Roos, I wasn't expecting the lovely introduction, so that's very nice. Thank you. So yes, I wanted to talk to you about recycling in flats. And any of you who live in a flat or have lived in a flat will know that it comes with various challenges when it comes to recycling, and as a result, blocks of flats generally suffer with low recycling rates. So you'll probably recognize that you don't have a lot of space in your flat for storage. Maybe you've got room for one bin, and so separating out recycling is quite a challenge. There's kind of no sense of ownership of communal spaces, and there's a lack of accountability for what gets put in communal bins. You've got one big bin, everybody can go and kind of chuck their bag in, and nobody knows who's done what. And all of that leads to weaker social norms around recycling compared to if you live next door to lots of people who put their recycling out every week. You get a sense of the social norm that doesn't exist in blocks of flats. The specific flats that we were doing this project on were in Lambeth in London, and some of them look like this. They're social housing generally, and so there's a whole load of other complicating contextual factors that go into that, and their lower recycling rates. But you can see the kind of thing that goes on. You've got that big bin in a kind of dark cupboard. People just want to get rid of their waste in there, and that's it. And there's kind of no accountability. So we were working with Re London to try to increase capture and quality of dry mixed recycling, so cardboard, plastics, and so on, and introduce and drive take up of new food waste and textiles and small electricals collections. Re London have already done a lot of ethnographic research, which we were involved in a few years ago on recycling in flats. And so, we built a pretty clear picture on what influences recycling in flats. I mean, these won't kind of be a huge surprise to all of you, but maybe there's a slightly different kind of framing of them when it comes to flats. I think what we found is that effective recycling depends on all of these conditions being met. So recycling needs to be as easy as other methods of waste disposal. So, that's quite a challenge if it's incredibly easy to put all your rubbish into one big open top bin. To try and be as easy as that is quite hard. But it's a kind of mundane routine behavior that you're trying to deal with. Knowledge doesn't change behavior by itself, but it's really important when it comes to recycling, because if people don't know what to recycle, or when they need to put it out, or kind of where their recycling must go, actually then recycling or good kind of intentions can fail. And people need to be ultimately motivated to recycle, particularly if there is another very easy solution to not recycling. The final element we added to this mix was about infrastructure, because particularly in these flats, if the recycling system is rubbish, pardon the pun, then people aren't going to use it. So if it's kind of not very nice to use, if they don't have the space internally to recycle and so on. The intervention we created was all about trying to capitalize on this as a moment of change. Typically moments of change are, something new happening in somebody's life, like a kind of significant life event, and so on. But we actually felt like this was, this was an interesting thing to try and create a sense of. So, people were getting new bins, they were getting lots of kind of salient new prompts and so on around the estate. So actually capitalize on this as a new kind of fresh start. So a series of kind of coordinated activity and changes to the surroundings to make people feel as though they were getting something brand new and kind of disrupt the old habits. Lots of stuff was sent to residents, so kind of letters, postcards, there were stickers around the place and so on. Essentially creating something that was that felt like a kind of brand new service that was replacing a kind of tired old one. I wanted to just very quickly run through some of the things we did and the kind of behavioural tools that we layered into them, because we packed it out with behavioural tools. So there were things like salience, which we used a lot of. So you can see everything was pretty bright. The new bins were there with kind of lots of kind of bright stickering on them, some kind of fun stuff on there like easy peasy lemon squeezy and how exciting, which you don't generally expect to see on bins, but I think hopefully kind of pique people's attention. There were kind of floor stickers guiding people to the bins and so on. That's just some close-ups. A lot of it, like I said, was about making it easy. So, how could we simplify messaging to really reduce confusion? So, above the kind of bins that are just about residual waste, be extremely clear about what goes in them, as opposed to no messaging. Just make it very clear that it's rubbish only and no recycling and no food. We removed friction, or attempted to remove friction, by giving people a bag that was a kind of small bag that they could hang inside their kitchen cupboard, that they could take all their stuff down to the bin with downstairs. And we used chunking to hopefully make it better to assimilate the knowledge of what you had to do. So it's kind of easy as 1, 2, 3 to do these things that you need to do. Added to that was a bit of pressure tactics. So some reciprocity thrown in, give people a tea bag with their new food waste recycling caddy so they can make a cup of tea while they read the instructions. They had free bags and free liners and so on. And a bit of personalization. So, make this whole new thing feel more personal. Kind of tell them they've been chosen especially, which they had been. Each estate was chosen as, to participate in the trial. So just finally some kind of results, and I think the thing with recycling is there's ways to evaluate perceptions and claim behavior, which is one thing, but given kind of social desirability bias, you have to take a lot of things into account if you're just surveying what people claim to do. However, we did do that through some depth with residents. But also actual behaviour, so using waste comp to analyse kind of pre and post. And we found that overall recycling rates went up by quite a significant amount. Residual waste went down, which was a great kind of corollary, and contamination, various different types of contamination of food and so on, but overall went down by 52%, which is a bit of a result. And the introduction of the new food waste service led to 43% food waste capture. Obviously, it had been 0 before because there hadn't been a food waste service, but that compares very, very favourably with existing other services in the UK, including kind of household collection services. So, overall, I think people viewed it as a really positive thing. Lots of people noticed it. They said they noticed it and were recycling more as a result, which was great. I've probably done what Lucy didn't, what Roos didn't and gone over, so apologies for that.
No problem. Thank you so much, Rob. And I feel like an added benefit of this intervention is having some very nice looking bin for the resident, which all looked really nice. Nice. And so, yes, to close this round of presentation, we have now Aanchal, who is a senior associate at Busara. She has several years of experience in economic and policy research, experimental analysis, intervention design, and project management. She has worked across 15 countries in the global south on critical issues in health, sustainability, and gender inequalities. Prior to joining Busara, Aanchal was a Behavioral Insights for Policy Fellow at the Center for Social and Behavioral Change, and she has also worked at the Boston Consulting Group as a Learning and Development Coordinator. As I have also heard that Aanchal, who is designing her own clothes, has been described as the most fashionable in the office, which I think is also always a nice way to influence one's close circle to upcycle, renew, repair old clothes. So yes, and exactly. Aanchal will now present an intervention project they did during a festival in India to encourage recycling behaviors. Over to you, Aanchal.
Thank you, Lucy. I don't know much about the last one, but I'm pretty sure that was just Julia. But yeah, I'm gonna bring up my screen. Let me know once you all can see it.
Not yet from my side.
No, it just says Aanchal started. Now we can see it. Great.
Okay, great. Yep, thank you so much, and thank you for that great introduction. So yeah, following from Roos and Rob, who had really interesting projects to share, I think mine's a bit more research oriented. So I apologize if that's heavy technical words in there. But it's also from a different perspective, which is a bit in the global south. So yeah, maybe I can give you a bit of background. Is that when we kind of approached this project, we were looking at enhancing existing policies and initiatives. So the issue was that there's a lot of awareness campaigns, even in countries like India and Kenya, but their reach is not there. And also it doesn't really look into these behavioral dynamics, as we've discussed, affect recycling behaviors a lot. And then the second bit of it was that waste management in the global south has really unique characteristics. One is that there's a lot of diversity across the recycling stakeholders themselves. And also that there are pre-existing household recycling practices that have been existing for years to come. For example, using coffee cans to store lentils. That's a very common example that you can see across every level of income households. And the last bit was to definitely integrate behavior science so that we can actually not just inform knowledge, but convert that into action. So we collaborated with this organization called Transform to help increase recycling behaviors in the global south. So we did all the works of behavior science, which is we looked at the barriers, mapping motivations, attitudes, and then eventually co-created solutions with a lot of recycling stakeholders. So this involved working with waste pickers, scrap dealers in the field to understand what would actually work for them. So yeah, there were two kind of experiments that I'm going to talk about, focusing more on the India one. But overall, the kind of barriers or the things that we were looking at addressing was that one, that was just a general low level of awareness around what exactly is recyclable. And then the second is that there is people feel like recycling involves a lot of cognitive effort. So that leads to laziness, it leads to deprioritization and non-participation. In an average Indian household, they prefer anything discussing maybe the news topic rather than recycling or waste management in their house. And so the experiments that I'm going to discuss briefly use a mixed methods approach. So we used waste weight measurement and quantitative surveys to gain some of the results, but also we use self-reported measures like attitudes, intentions, and self-efficacy with the consumers. So yeah, that's just a bit of technical background. But coming to the interventions themselves, I think, yep. Yeah, so coming to the interventions themselves, the first one was with Kenyan consumers that we did in a lab. So the two interventions that I'm going to talk about is first the recycling drag and drop game. So we created this online game that we had our consumers test and play. And essentially they had items that were given to them, which they had to drop into the relevant bin. And we tested if this actually worked by giving them a set of snacks during their break time within that experiment and seeing if they could actually convert that into real life behaviors. A lot of people didn't catch that we were testing it, so that's a good sign. But yeah, and the second game that we used, the second kind of signal that we used was to signal peer behavior. As you know, social influences are really strong, especially when it comes to behaviors in a group. So we kind of pre-fill the bins with waste items and saw how people kind of responded to pre-filled bins as an indicator of how other people that segregated that waste. And in this particular setting, we saw that both the game as well as the signaling behavior led to a lot of increase in accuracy and waste segregation, but also like people who were more confident in their ability to recycle waste correctly, which was a really good sign. So we were able to take the results from this to the field, which is the second experiment that I want to talk about here today. So this was, as you know, like in festivals in India are characterized by large quantities of waste being generated. So we thought that this would be a really nice controlled environment to test actually if a nudge can work in a in a real life setting. So we set this up at a local festival venue in India. And of course, we had like the works of all of the behavior science communication. We used like symbols from the festival itself, like of the goddess, of just the cultural identity. But our main intervention was a modified bin setup, as you can see on the right hand side. As you know, like a lot of people in this who were attending this festival, did not have a lot of time. We did not know the levels of literacy. So despite having like color coded bins and like labels, we wanted to include visual samples. So the clear containers that you can see on top of the boxes there included like waste samples that we had picked out from the venue itself. So they were personalized. So essentially what any consumer had to do was when they reached the bin, had to match the item in their hand with what was there in the box. So it kind of tried to simplify the process even more and reduce the cognitive load that came towards recycling. And we saw that actually the visual and social cues help people increasingly be accurate about the waste that they segregated. And as you can see, we even use some weight measurements on the left to identify if this change between the two, between having the intervention and not, actually helped. And specifically for paper waste, which is the most confusing to identify, at least for people in the venue, it worked out really well. So yeah, just I guess to conclude, the behavioral perspective for us looked at like three kind of basic things. One was that the behavior in this case depended on like a long chain of events. So the decisions that people have to make to get to segregate accurately is a long journey. So we need to intervene at each point of that. Second is that the perceptions around the behavior really influence the decision to perform it, and that people are actually able to perform the behavior if they have the capability, opportunity, and ability to perform it. So yeah, that was, I guess, our learnings from it. There's a playbook which has like a host of other interventions that we came up with in this kind of 2-year long research process. And I think the last thing that I want to leave everyone with is that what really worked for us was collaborating with like local stakeholders. So a key like stakeholder in our running our experiments were local waste pickers. So we really leveraged their local knowledge to understand how waste actually needs to be recycled, whether it be in a city in New Delhi or a city in Kenya, and they were entirely different. So yeah, that was, I think, one of the key reasons for our success. Yeah, thank you so much. Sorry if I'm over time.
Super interesting. Thank you so much, Aanchal. And exactly, I feel like we could talk about this topic for hours, particularly with so dense research from your side. Very fascinating. Before we dive into the panel question, we have a poll question for all of the audience. Maybe Julia, you want to launch the question and read it out for the audience?
Yes, the poll question, I think. Yes, launch. Okay, good. Can everyone see it?
Yes, I mean, at least I can.
Great. Should I read it out for you all? So how much more expensive is it for low and middle income countries to manage plastic pollution compared to high income countries? And we have heard this in the presentation, maybe not. If you paid close attention, 3 times more expensive, 8 times more expensive, 10 times more expensive. Okay. I think most of the people have responded, and you'll be very surprised if I share the results because I can see them in the back. Oh, and are you also answering the second question at this point? Yes. How much daily waste is produced by an average American compared to a Kenyan? 5 kilograms versus 0. 2 kilograms and 2 kilograms versus 0.5 kilograms. Okay. And poll, and then share the results. So for the first one, we have a pretty even number on people responding to all three options, more or less evenly. We have a winner, which is 8 times more expensive, and that is also the correct answer. Just double checking with yes, with the answers I have here. Great. And then on the second question, how much daily waste is produced by an average American compared to a Kenyan? 64%, the majority of people said 5 kilograms versus 0.2 kilograms. And that is also correct. It's 2 kilograms versus 0.5 kilograms, which is the correct answer. So people were almost right on the second one. Okay, I stop share here and I can share the results.
Thank you.
Okay.
Julia. There. So then, yes, maybe to start the panel, I keep having the poll coming up. Yes, the first question could be, so the focus on recycling has been repeatedly criticized because people often prioritize this behavior, even though other behaviors might have greater impact, particularly if we talk about carbon emission. Yeah, how do you feel about this? And yeah, do you want to start with that question, Rob?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that when we've done research more generally on kind of sustainable behaviours, it's amazing how recycling, how recycling comes absolutely top of what people think, is going to make the biggest change to their personal emissions. When we've kind of dug into it a bit deeper, it's essentially it's something that people are doing on a, potentially even multiple times a day on a daily basis. So, there's a lot of present bias going on. It's a kind of salient thing that people are doing. And so it feels important, even if it's not, in terms of kind of, ultimate emissions. If you kind of look at somebody's like a household emissions and the importance of waste is, something like 3 to 5% versus heating, which is like 40% or something like that. So I think there's the kind of the daily nature of it, and the fact that it's therefore more kind of presently salient, that means that people feel like it's more important than other behaviors.
Definitely. Aanchal or Roos, would you like to add something?
I also find those results from like research always so interesting, like the differences between what people think is the most impactful and what actually is the most impactful. And some time ago, I had a discussion with someone who responded to the work that we did about on recycling with like, why are you even focusing on recycling? There are machines that can do this for you, so it's a system problem. And I was like, well, yes and no. Like, yes, it's a system problem, but still there's also impact that can be made on an individual level. So this project that I talked about right now is in the US. I'm living in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and here we don't actually have to separate plastic from other things. Like the only thing we separate is glass and paper and everything else, because the facilities here take the plastic out. But still, you're not supposed to, if you have an empty yogurt cup and you're also eating some fruit and you eat a banana, for example, you're not supposed to put your banana peel in the plastic cup, because if you put it in a trash like that, then the machines at the recycling facility are still going to have a hard time with separating the plastic from the other trash. So yes, the system and the machinery at recycling facilities can improve and can also do a lot, but still there is an individual impact that is really important to also improve. And also, I feel like when people come with this comment of like, it's a system problem, we just need better machines. And like, yeah, but like if everybody's just gonna point to someone else, then who is really gonna do something about this problem, right? So yes, it's about the system as well, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you're not responsible yourself anymore. So also you can do your part.
Yes, definitely. And yeah, I think that applies to many more topics outside of recycling as well. I would be curious to hear your thoughts on what are the pros and cons on using digital tools, such as what you've described, Bruce, of like apps, reminder, gamified experience, versus physical interventions that we might have heard from Rob and Aanchal within the waste and recycling behavior, and how do you approach using one or the other?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and also something that we are struggling is maybe a big word, but like we're looking into a lot, because the thing with a digital tool like a chatbot, like it has potential, but it does add friction to the process. Because if you're about to throw away something and you're like, oh, I don't remember what I'm supposed to do with this, like who is gonna pull out their phone, chat with a chatbot, like put the words that you have in your head, like the question that you want to ask, put that into words that the chatbot will understand, and then wait for the answer, and also go back and forth a little bit about like, what is your zip code? So it adds so much friction to the process that it's really important to think about like, okay, what is actually the goal of this chatbot, and when should it be used, or when do people use it? Because initially we were like, oh, this is so great. If you have a question about like what you're about to throw away, you can just chat with the chatbot. But in real life, like so little people actually do that. So now we're rethinking how the chatbot can best be, or can best serve the need that people have, because they still have those questions about what you need to do with certain items, but the chatbot may not be the best way to solve that problem or that challenge in the moment that you're disposing something. So yeah, digital tools can really be useful, and especially since recycling is like everybody should do it, right? And some people like digital tools, other people like physical tools. So in that way, you can kind of cater to different segments of your audience. But don't put all your eggs in one basket and put it all on a chatbot or put it all on a QR code. But really, when it comes to a complex behavior like recycling, it's really important to have this ecosystem of different types of tools and different types of solutions that cater to different audiences, different needs, and different types of information that people will need and at different moments in time.
Yep, and I think I just wanted to add to that. Like I think like in like the example that I was describing where we had this recycling game, like it's also important to know that it does, like any digital tool, whatever it might be, it does assume a certain level of literacies, even more digital literacy, which I guess like even in the example that we were using, the Kenyan consumers, you could assume that there was a certain level of like comfort that they had with using devices, that they were able to actually play the game and find it fun. So I think like just echoing what Drew said, that it's kind of dependent on the context that you're applying it to. Definitely like physical interventions have limited adaptability, but they are definitely like easier to scale and more accessible, especially when you're working with populations less literate, maybe from low income groups. So yeah, I saw that like difference even when we were working with communities in India and Kenya. So yeah, I think the ideal would be to have like a combination of two, something that helps sustain motivation and habits through a longer period of time. But yeah, of course, that is dependent on a lot of different factors.
Great, thank you. Another one, since we're talking about a few barriers and that to access either technology or physical intervention, we've had a previous event about sludge, and so we were wondering if you could also elaborate on some example of sludge or friction in recycling behaviors, and what remains to be done, and what are the bigger ones. And
yeah, I can jump in. I mean, so often it's just kind of built into the waste disposal systems that there is friction in the process, and I guess it's not it's not deliberate, and attempts are made to reduce it as much as possible, but it's all about comparing it with the alternative behavior, which is putting everything into the residual waste. And so often that is just really easy. And so, so kind of anything that makes it harder to, to kind of put your stuff in the right place. I mean, in the case of flats, the difference between like I said, a kind of open topped bin where you could put anything you want in, and a kind of system where you have to sort your rubbish and kind of be careful about where you put it in, and perhaps go to the other end of the estate and so on. So kind of any removal of any of those bits of friction, and actually sometimes adding friction to the residual waste process. So actually, instead of open top bins, you have a closed bin that people can only use, and actually, like, with household collections, adding friction involves like only collecting residual waste every 2 weeks instead of every 1 week, and collecting recycling every week. So you can't overfill your bin. So yeah, I think it applies both ways.
If I can add one thing to that, like you mentioned, like household recycling. Well, I also mentioned household recycling. I think everybody did at this point, but my point was more like when we were looking into recycling flows and habits that people already have, it's really interesting, and I find it super fascinating to see how people have set up their recycling system in home, because it's quite easy to think like, oh, recycling, okay, that's the bin in the kitchen. But everybody has a bin in their office, or a bin in the bathroom, or they have a bin maybe at the separate toilet. So you have so many different bins, and quite often you see that those bins in other rooms are like just a small bin where just everything gets tossed in, whereas the bin in the kitchen is typically where people have, if they even have like separate boxes or separate bins, then that will be in the kitchen. And then also when that's full, you kind of move your bag to a different place, maybe the garage or maybe next to the door, and then everything gets collected at one point, and then you bring it outside. So I think it's just really interesting to then see, okay, at which point in someone's recycling flow and their own little system that they have in the house, at which point can you intervene and help them make it easier to put the right materials in the right category or in the right box that they're gonna move to a different location at some point, to make it easier for people to separate waste and recyclables at different stages of their own journey.
Definitely. And Anchal, I'm curious if you have any specific sludge you'd like to mention about your global south experience and the studies you did.
Yeah, of course. Like, I think the one in the global south is like, it's a bit unique because, of course, there's like the consumer side, but like the infrastructural barriers are quite a bit in itself. So like, even for me to go and recycle something, I don't know where the closest like facility even is for me to be able to do that. So like, I think we're still at kind of that systemic change point. And like, I just recalled one because of Roos's example. Like, I think it's the same, that like, I think some households have really been educated about segregating waste, but it's not really in line with like the system. So like, you'll see like, for example, from some of the households where I live, you'll have these segregated bins and bags which are coming out, but then when the waste collector comes to pick it up, it's kind of just put into the same bag and taken away. So I guess the point of the segregation at which it was done is either being repeated at another point, which so it was not required, or that information is just not going down the chain in the right way. So yeah, I think in the global south, the change is like definitely systemic, and I think that's a complaint from a lot of just a lot of the stakeholders that we interacted with, and it's just an alignment that needs to happen down that whole chain.
Yes, thank you. Also, yeah, I'll ask one more question, but please feel free if you have any question to write them down, or after raise your hand, happy to take any question. But so yeah, from my side, and I think we've already touched briefly upon it with your example, Ruth explaining how in the US, even like different states have different ways of managing waste and yeah, doing things. So I was just wondering what can we learn about good recycling practice from different national system or even within national system, and what can be carried from different cultural contexts to another one?
There's a question directed at someone specific.
No, again, open, but I don't know if you have insight around, again, the US experience.
Yeah. So the funny thing is, I'm not living there, right? So for me, I had to talk to my colleagues who are in the US to kind of make sense of certain results that we found. Because for me, it sometimes didn't really make sense why people would do a certain thing because I wasn't aware that you need to bring plastic bags to a supermarket. Like here, I don't do that. But even within a country as small as the Netherlands, it is also different because I need to not separate my stuff here in Amsterdam, or like just those three main things. Whereas I'm originally from the South, and there you do need to separate everything. So I kind of had to unlearn recycling, or like I had my habit of recycling things how I used to, and then I moved to Amsterdam, and I was like, oh, I separated this, but oh yeah, I just put it all in the same thing. So why am I even doing this? Kind of the same as you just mentioned, Anchal. Like, what is the point of me doing this when the system is going to put everything together on one pile? But I think the most important thing here is it kind of underscores the importance of doing local research and understanding the context in which you're operating, because you can design a solution, but like the solution that we're working on in the US probably won't work in the context that Aanchal is working, because it's just so different. The systems are different, the habits that people have are different, like social norms are different. So that just won't work. So it just really is important to do your research locally. And of course, you can look at examples from other projects in different contexts, but you can't just copy paste that to a different location.
Very brief experience is the difference between recycling in England and Wales. So kind of English recycling rates have been languishing at kind of, I don't know, around kind of 40% for quite a long time. But in Wales, I think they're now the second best recyclers in the world. They were third until quite recently, I think, and it's a kind of amazing success story, and like a lot of it is built on a kind of collective sense of national pride, I think, which isn't just obviously for recycling and waste management. You know, the Welsh have a lot of national pride generally, but to be able to kind of use that to create or to build a social norm around recycling is kind of amazing. So a lot of the communications and interventions have focused on that as a almost national kind of social norm, which has been really effective.
Wow, incredible. Impressive also, yeah. Managing to be the first or top manager, yeah. Change.
Who was number 1 and 2? Or like now you're 2, but
I knew you'd ask me that, and now I can't remember.
oh, okay.
I've got a feeling Germany is top.
Of course, Germany.
Yeah, I think I wanted to add one thing to like that question. I think one thing that I think at least the global south can borrow from the global north a lot, other than the systems, of course, is like I think that perceptions around waste management, like I think are generally on the more positive side. I may be wrong, like you can let me know. But yeah, like I think in the global south, they perceive it to be something that's only done by specific people, not something that's to be done in the house by everyone. I'm hoping that perception is changing, but like yeah, I think that really creates like the biggest barrier. I think is that to find it to be a dirty job. I think that really does affect your perceptions towards recycling and waste management. But one thing that I think works well for the global south is just because the whole system of waste management is so informal through these waste pickers, there's a very personal relationship to getting each and every person to recycle if their relationship with their garbage collector is really good. So they're able to reach each and every single household, even if it's like in very remote areas. So that network exists. We've just not been able to leverage it in the best way possible. And also just because it's a collectivistic community, it's easy to engage people when lots of people are doing it together. So even in like the festival, we saw that because most people were doing it, everybody's like, okay, this is the right thing to do. So yeah, it's easy to get people to jump on the bandwagon, and especially in these contexts.
Nice, good to hear. And I do have a question on social norms, but maybe I'll ask it after. But there was this question for you, Angel, which was asking from the game that you described in the Kenyan experiment, is it scalable?
Yeah, sorry if I'm missing that in the chat. Yeah, I think that's a good question. I do think the game in itself use like very like everyday household items. So I do think that there are places that we can refine it further just in terms of making it more user friendly. But like I said, that if we were trying to like kind of position this for like less literate populations, I don't think that this would work and it would be less impactful. But I've seen like people replicate these in places like the tube stations or like the train stations where you know that there's a certain level of like a certain kind of crowd that is attending those. So yeah, I think it again depends on who you're targeting. So again, scalability in general across the global south, I would say not yet, but to specific populations for the purpose of information, you probably can.
Great, thank you.